Welcome to Northwest, a Unitarian Universalist congregation, where we are gathering this morning both virtually and in person as one connected church community. I'm Alex Myers, my pronouns are he and they, and I'm your worship leader for this morning's service. We, the members of the Northwest Unitarian Universalist congregation, aspire to be a welcoming, diverse, multi-generational, and inclusive congregation. To this end, we endeavor to treat each other with respect, trust, kindness, and patience, foster expression of ideas, beliefs, values, identities, and experiences, lift one another and the congregation as a whole, provide a supportive environment for all sharing hope on this journey, listen and learn together while caring for each other and the planet, and build a fair, peaceful, and socially responsible world. May we create a beloved community with a gentle heart and thoughtful ear, and maintain this community with our 8 Unitarian Universalist principles as our guide. We welcome the Reverend Julie Brock, our contract minister of worship this morning. Her primary responsibility will be to provide direction on the planning and scheduling for all of the Northwest UU worship services, as well as the joint worship services with the First UU Church of Detroit. Each month, we contemplate a theme using Soul Matters. This month, we are considering the concept of heritage. Today's message asks us to explore the question, how the theology of religious traditions are represented in the food we bring to Potlucks. We'll have our next potluck here at Northwest next week on Sunday, October 15th. If you're a visitor online and would like Northwest to stay in touch with you, please fill out the visitor form appearing in the chat box. If you are with us in person, you can fill out the visitor sign-in form in the atrium. And now please greet your neighbors with a wave from wherever you are. We have a few announcements to share with you this morning. More information about our events and the congregation are posted in the weekly newsletter and on our website, northwestuu.org. You are welcome to join us for free coffee, tea, and light refreshments after the service in the multipurpose room. And then today from 1 to 3, you are invited by the Northwest UU Youth Programs Committee on a trip to the Opsbaum Apple Orchard in Northville. There will be apple picking, donuts, cider, and more. This is a multi-generational event, and friends are welcome. Opsbaum takes cash, check, or Venmo. As I mentioned, you can join us for a monthly potluck next week on Sunday, October 15th after the service. This date will also be a joint service, which will be held here at Northwest. So we are inviting folks from First UU to Detroit to attend the potluck as well. Please bring extra food or a main dish to share. Northwest's biggest and best fundraiser, the service auction, is coming. Now is the time to donate. You may donate items, offer services, or plan events. You can do all this online at the service auction website at nwuu.maxgiving.bid/about-us. Or you can go old school and bring your items to church. You can always talk to a committee member about your donation ideas and save the date, November 11th, for the live auction party. You can see Beata Lamparski, Ariana Abel, Jan Berger-Cohn, Margaret Block, Tracy Gutierrez, Linda Morris, Martha Spear, or Sally Young for more information. And now, before we begin the prelude, let's all take a deep breath and settle into a time of worship.
It was beautiful. As we begin our worship services, we offer this land acknowledgement. We honor and pay our respects to the land on which we live and work, which was violently stolen through colonialism, genocide, and forced removal of its traditional stewards. These stewards are the Anishinaabeg, the Council of Three Fires, which include the Ottawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi, also known as the Ottawa, Chippewa, and Potawatomi tribes. We also acknowledge the people of African descent who were forcibly removed from their land and separated from their families through kidnapping, enslavement, and pay reverence and respect to them for building this country's infrastructure and economy with no compensation or reparations to date. Alex, would you light our chalice today? We light our chalice as a symbol of faith, knowing this morning that many other Unitarian Universalist congregations across this land and around the world are doing the same thing. We do so with the words from Reverend Katie Romano Griffin. Come, let us enter this space of hope and community. Come, let us enter this space with our sorrows and our joys, our passion and our compassion. Come, let us enter this space with the stories of our ancestors, for their strength and wisdom beats in our hearts. Come into this space present to the beloved companions who we meet here beside us. Come into this space mindful that together we are building a future for other generations. Come into this space and let us worship. Rise up, O flame, my light growing, show to us beauty, vision, and joy. If you will now rise yourselves in body and or spirit and join in singing number 361, Enter, Rejoice, and Come In.
One purpose of a religious community is to encourage all who gather together to grow more generous in spirit and in action. This is the great end of all the world's faith traditions, to bring the human being closer to the divine by acts of creation and compassion. We now take an offering that allows us to exercise that all-important generosity of spirit, an offering that will mutually support this self-supporting congregation and the shared plate recipient. Each month, Northwest shares 50% of the plate collections with a local 501c3 charity organization. The Social Justice Committee has selected Lighthouse of Oakland County as our October shared plate recipient. Lighthouse endeavors to build equitable communities that alleviate poverty in partnership with and in service to individuals, families, and organizations. You can donate in a variety of ways that are now visible on your screen. For those of you who are here in person, we will pass a collection basket for checks and cash. We invite you to be generous. Well, thank you, everyone. I will light one more candle for those things not yet shared, for the challenges and blessings you may be holding in your hearts. Blessed be. Amen. And now you are invited to rise in body or spirit and join with me in singing hymn number 197 and singing the Living Tradition. There are numerous strings. If you can play through the melody just once. Our reading this morning are words from Peter Fredericks. We are the accumulated history of all those who have gone before us. We are the stewards of a legacy of love, of courage, of commitment, of hope, of faith. What they dreamed be ours to do, and we are called to be dreamers too. We are called by future generations, by the children we see running rampant throughout the building on Sunday mornings, and by untold numbers of children yet to be born, to create and sustain a vision of what might be, of what we might yet become. This is our sacred duty, a duty that, in part, we live into through our financial support of this church. This is who we were. This is who we are. And this is who we are called to be. This is us.
How about now? Oh, I apologize for not editing out the stewardship line from the reading. Sorry, that was my plan. I didn't get to it. Folks, it is so nice to be here with you this morning once again. So I have officially become your quarter-time minister for worship. I'm pretty excited about it. You are the 5th Unitarian Universalist congregation that I have ever entered into contract with to provide worship for them. And over that time, my experience with those 5 congregations, I have learned that it behooves me right at the beginning to tell you all what my theory is. This too loud? Yes? Okay. Hey, Ben, this is a bit too loud. They're not used to how loud I am. Ben's known me for years, he should be. So I've learned over time that it behooves me to tell folks right at the beginning what my theory of worship is, so that you know what's coming and that we can work on it together, right? Because I haven't always had a very succinct theory of worship. When I started out, one of my first congregations I took was the UU congregation out in Brighton, Michigan. I was a baby minister at the time. I didn't have a succinct theory of worship. I didn't really know exactly what I was doing. I was still living into how to be up here, how to minister to a congregation. And the great thing was, at the time, that church was about 20 years old, so they were still figuring it out too, all at once. And it was really good that we liked each other a whole lot, because we had a lot of figuring out to do all at the same time. In fact, they were still kind of fighting about the basics and fundamentals of their identity. There was an ongoing fight in that congregation about what they called themselves. They still hadn't completely settled into their name. Because years before, they had had all of these committees and conferences and potlucks and church conversations about what they would call themselves now that they were meeting weekly as a Unitarian Universalist congregation out in Brighton, Michigan. And there were all kinds of camps of people that thought that they should make a different decision. There was one camp that said, let's just do the easy thing. We're the UU Church of Brighton or Livingston County or what have you. Then there was another camp that said, no, we should be auspicious. We should call ourselves the community of all souls, or something like religious and all-encompassing and very ostentatious. And then there was another camp that said, no. This is Livingston County. This is the only liberal game in town. A whole lot of us are here because we kind of need a community. We want a social club and a lecture series. We don't want anything religious. Can we please keep it out of the name? So they talked, and they discussed, and they discerned, and they fought. And they finally ended up signing the documents with Community Unitarian Universalists in Brighton. Or, as my friend and mentor, the Reverend Dr. Michael Tino, likes to call them, our Holy Mother of not answering the question. And you might be thinking, why does it matter? Why does it matter what we call ourselves, be it community or congregation or church? We all kind of get the purpose of why we're here in the morning, so it doesn't really matter. Except, what do you tell the people at the newcomers class when they ask what this place is? I wanted to get it right. I wanted to honor the history. So the first time I did a new member class at CUB, the Community Unitarian Universalists in Brighton, I invited 3 longtime members to engage in the class with me, to tell stories with me, and to give me feedback afterwards. I invited 3 people. Their names have been changed to protect the innocent. The first was Jim. Jim was a man in his 70s. He was a staunch humanist, and he was a very liberal in values and thought that this could be a great place to do social justice, but didn't want any religion mucking it up. There was another woman named Gwen. She was in her 30s. She had been raised Unitarian Universalist and found comfort in her church home. And then there was Ellen. Ellen was a woman in her 50s who had found Unitarian Universalism by way of Judaism. So I told the stories of the history of how Unitarians and Universalists got to be here, and I talked about that specific congregation, and I even tried to, in a very nice way, talk about the naming debacle. And afterwards, I said to them, okay, how'd I do? And Jim said, no, absolutely not, unacceptable. I was like, oh, okay, what happened? And he's like, first of all, you told a whole long story about church. No one here wants to hear how any church came to be. And second of all, and this is worse, you call this a church. And I was like, okay, well, nomenclature, right? I grew up in the first UU Church of Detroit. I'm used to calling it that. Okay, I can watch. This doesn't have church in the title. Sorry. And he said, thank you. You need to watch it because we are a non-religious community of secular free thinkers. I said, okay. And at which point Gwen stood up and said, Jim, you need to keep your wheeze to yourself. This is my religion. I grew up in it. I want this to be my church. And if you tell me that I can't go to church on Sunday morning, then I don't want to be here. I am sick of people who found this religion 5 minutes ago telling me that it can't be mine anymore. In which Ellen said, whoa, there's all kinds of fighting going on here. Can't we do something in between? Look, I want religious experience. If I wanted this to be a social club and a lecture series, then I would join a book club. I like that we engage our spirits in this space, but as a person who was raised Jewish, the word church feels really out of bounds for me. It makes me feel excluded from this space. And Jim said, yep. Any kind of church, religious at all, and I can't be here. And Gwen said, well, if you don't call it a church, then I can't be here. And Ellen said, well, can we do something in between, but not really either at all? And I said, oh, yeah, this is going to be easy to fix. And I looked at these 3 people who were looking to me to tell them that they could still be part of the community that they cared so much about. And the only thing I came up with at the time was, you know what I like about Unitarian Universalism? I really like our potlucks. I really like our potlucks because, everybody brings something different to the table and we all walk away nourished. And while it wasn't completely concise and eloquently stated at that moment, that was the beginning of my theory of worship in Unitarian Universalist congregations, that worship should be like a potluck created by many hands and with lots of different options to nourish many different people. I do have a theory that you can tell almost anything you need to know about a religious community by how they do their potlucks. I was convinced of this after starting to go to church picnics and potlucks with my mother-in-law's church in southern Indiana, the First General Baptist Church of Co. I looked at their potlucks and I was like, this potluck, it mirrors their theology exactly. On Sunday morning, they had a Holy Trinity, and at the potlucks, they also had a Holy Trinity. Instead of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, they had fried chicken, always, pie for dessert, and every single time there would be salad, which I have come to understand means a Jell-O dish with fruit in it. Fried chicken, pie, and salad. Every Sunday morning, the Holy Trinity in church. Every Sunday potluck, the Holy Trinity on the table. And I thought about it, I'm like, this really does mimic the values of this community. There's consistency here. You know what you're going to get every time you come. And if it works for you, it's going to be nourishing and fulfilling every single time, completely and totally. If you don't like fried chicken, pie, and Jell-O for every meal, it might not work for you, and they're not super concerned. They think that you should go somewhere and find something to eat that you actually like. And if you have any dietary restrictions, it might not be super healthy for you to worship with them every week. But if you fit into the mold and you like the Jell-O, you're good. I thought how very, very different Unitarian Universalist potlucks were. And I thought how so much our values were also reflected in the way that we do our potlucks. It seems like we also sometimes insist on a mandatory minimum of 3 quinoa salads, but no matter what, we always have these little ingredients cards where we write everything out, and that matters because it shows our value of consent. It shows our value of consent. We want people to know what they're putting in their bodies. Kind of like on Sunday morning, the General Baptist Church of Co. did not write out every song and reading that they had in an order of service. You were just supposed to eat what you were given, but we want you to consent and know what's coming. We also cared about inclusion. Almost every potluck, there was something vegan and gluten-free, and it would be made sure that no matter who walked in the door, they could be nourished by what we offered at that table. We certainly aren't perfect about it, but we do try to make sure, and we care about diversity. We care that no matter what, there's all kinds of different dishes on the table so people can try different things and come away with things that they like. I stand by the notion that you can tell most of what you need to know about a religious community by how they do their potlucks. And I stand by my assertion that I really like the way that we do ours. So I wrote it all in a sermon, and I gave it at the Community Unitarian Universalists of Brighton, and I specifically invited Ellen and Gwen and Jim to come. And afterwards, I was like, what do you think? Did it fix it? Is it better? And Ellen said to me, all right, I get where you're going with this. And when I hear the word church, that really it sets me off a little bit because Christian people do not have the greatest track record with Jewish people. And I said, yeah, you're right. But Unitarians kind of do. Unitarians have a pretty good track record with Jewish people. In fact, the question of whether or not we should be Unitarian or Trinitarian was foundationally and fundamentally decided by our need to include Jewish folks in worship back in the very early days of Christianity. You all know the story of the Council of Nicaea, right? There's like this story that's told about how Christianity was formed. But there's part of it that isn't told. So the story that's told all the time, right, is that Constantine becomes emperor, and he's like, okay, everybody's going to be Christian now. But the way that Christian church was going back in that day is there were a bunch of different communities and different places practicing all kinds of different ways and believing all kinds of different things. Does that sound familiar? And so Constantine was like, this isn't going to work because I need there to be some strict rules and I need to set them so I can be in charge. So you all need to get on the same page about who this Jesus person is and how you relate to him. I don't care what you do, but you need to do the same thing. And so they had all these church councils and they got together and they decided, there was one camp over here run by this guy named Athanasius, and he was like, Jesus is the same thing as God. It was the beginning of the theology of the Trinity, right? Jesus, God, they added the Holy Spirit later. Same thing. And there was this other guy, Arius, and he was like, that does not make any sense. He was like, that does not make any sense. What are you talking about? They're two different entities. I mean, sure, Jesus was like a teacher. He was like a good dude. He was holy and divine in lots of ways. Great, but like, it doesn't make any sense, this Trinity thing you're talking about. So they thought about it and they fought about it, and Constantine was like, wait, I like what this guy's saying, because if Jesus can be a prophet venerated, maybe we can do that for emperors? Huh? And then he like snapped his fingers, and suddenly all of Rome was Unitarians for a few years until because that was the beginning of the Unitarian theology, right? That there's like one God and everything else is like something else. And so we were all Unitarians for just a brief moment in time until this question came up where Constantine needed, for political reasons, to start persecuting Jewish people. It was a very popular thing to do back then. Maybe not just back then. Anyway, Constantine needed to start persecuting Jewish people, so he went to Arius, and he was like, hey, these Jewish people, they don't believe what we believe. We can't worship with them, right? And Arius was like, why? And he's like, well, we believe in Jesus. And Arius was like, well, but didn't we just decide? Didn't we just decide that actually you don't have to believe in Jesus as God in order to be Christian and worship amongst here? And Constantine goes, ooh, yeah, we did. Let's change that. Let's do something different now, because, that's important. And Arius said, all right, let me gather my people. What do we want to do? Do we want to incur the wrath of Rome, or do we want to stick by our values and say that all people should be welcome at our table, at our communion table? And well, you all know what happened, because Constantine switched over to the Trinity, and it was the beginning of the Catholic Church, and but all throughout history, the Unitarians, the people that followed that theology, have said it is important that we have everyone welcome at our table. And the thing is, it wasn't us doing them some big favor. We were made better for it. We cemented our theology in that moment, and also our value system, that they were one and the same. We cemented who we were as the beginning of a fledgling theology, and it has been happening ever since. Our chalice, do you know where we got this symbol? The very symbol of our chalice came from the UU Service Committee. They had a symbol of a chalice, and they came to prominence when they were trying to make sure that families, Jewish families in Nazi-occupied Europe, had safety. They were trying to get them out of Europe or hide them. And this was their symbol, and we said, oh, yes, that's the value that we want. We want to be a beacon of hope to those in darkness. And now we light one at the beginning of every Unitarian Universalist service at almost every UU church around the country. And that hymnal that we've been singing out of, that gray one, that came to be back in the 1990s. Do you know the story of how it came to be? It came to be when Margot Adler, who was a woman who was a pagan and also a Unitarian Universalist, said, hey, even in the 70s and 80s, it's not safe for pagan women to worship openly. There were still women getting their children taken away for being occult practitioners in the 70s and 80s. So she said, let's invite them into our sanctuaries. And they came and they did solstice services, and it was lovely. And they looked in our old hymnals and they were like, y'all, this is pretty patriarchal stuff. And they went to the Women's Federation and they said, did you know about this? And the UU Women's Federation was like, yeah, we're used to it. And they were like, ought you be? And they worked together to create this very hymnal that we have now. There are stories upon stories throughout Unitarian Universalism of Unitarian Universalist churches inviting those who are different than us into our space and then becoming better, learning who we are. There are stories on the West Coast of Unitarian Universalist congregations, or I suppose Unitarian at the time, opening their churches to people coming out of Japanese internment camps that had lost their place of worship, but gained a wonderful mindfulness meditation practice from the combining of the learning that they found there. There are stories of Unitarian Universalist churches who have beautiful cultural exchanges with mosques after they allowed them to have safe haven in our congregations after they were persecuted after the 9/11 incidents. And of course, there's our merger. Our merger, which didn't happen in any sanctuary, it didn't start at any conference or with any committee. Our merger started when two religions, Unitarians and Universalists, who were struggling with their identity because we weren't really going to church anymore because we believed in one God or universal salvation. That wasn't at the center of it. We were struggling with who we were. But we knew we wanted a more inclusive and better world, so we joined the civil rights marches and met each other there and said, this is it. This is who we are. We are a people of values and principles standing up for the needs of the marginalized. Our very merger was formed. Our symbol of our faith, the beginnings of our theology were all cemented when we said yes and invited others in and let them change us. We do come out of Christianity. We've always been a privileged faith. But when we use that privilege for good, when we admit that we are and we use it for good, we become transformed and we become better. So look, I'm never going to tell anyone that they can't practice their Christian heritage or call or call this space, their sacred space, anything that they want, because it's important where we came from. And we're so much more than that now, and we are better for it. So, is the community Unitarian? Are the community Unitarian Universalists in Brighton a church? Well, they're not Ellen's church, and that's okay. And no one should ever tell her that they have to be. And they are Gwen's church, and that's okay. And no one should ever tell her that they can't be. And from time to time in the pulpit, I called them a church and a community and a congregation because some people needed all of those things. Gwen and Ellen were pretty good with that answer. Jim was not. So Jim, I referred back to the idea of the potluck. Look, folks, if you go to a potluck and you can eat 80% of what's there, that's a pretty good potluck, right? You're not going to get to try everything anyway. So if you go to a potluck and you can eat 80% of what is there, you probably feel well-nourished and satisfied when you walk away. So, as your new minister of worship, here is my theory of worship for you. If you like 80% of everything you're hearing from the pulpit, we are doing pretty good. Can we all agree on that? Is 80% like pretty good? Yes? Okay, all right. If you like 80%, you're doing pretty good. And hey, listen, if there's something that's not for you, that's okay. Just like you would at a potluck, leave it for somebody else. I mean, come on. If you go to a potluck and you see a vegan, gluten-free brownie, maybe you don't want to eat it, but maybe that's somebody else's only chance at sweetness that day. So look, if you're not getting 80%, because there's part of the potluck is that it's collaborative, right? And it's really important to me that each and every one of you are getting your 80%. So if you're not, I want you to come to me and we'll talk about it. We got a bunch of brilliant worship leaders that can help out too, and guest speakers. We contain multitudes. There are many possibilities. I'm going to make sure you get your 80% if I at all possibly can. But here's the thing, and I need you to know this. If you come to me and say, I'm not getting my 80%, I'm going to respond and say, okay, what else can we add? Because with our long history of inclusion, I think it's right to not take anything off the table. Look, If you're the minister of a Unitarian Universalist congregation, there's two ways you can prepare a meal for everyone. You can make the pastor's favorite dishes, leave them out on the table and say, come get them and enjoy them if you will. That's a lot of work, and it is not guaranteed to satisfy. There's another way. You can get in the kitchen, bring some good, wholesome ingredients, and invite the people to come cook with you. My promise, I will ever endeavor for the second way. Blessed be, and amen. Folks, would you stand in body or spirit, rise in body or spirit, and join me in singing hymn number 407, Welcome Table. I keep losing track of what's next.
Oh, it's me. Please repeat after me. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of hope.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of hope.
The warmth of community.
The warmth of community.
Or the fire of commitment.
Or the fire of commitment.
These we carry in our hearts.
These we carry in our hearts.
Until we are together again.
Until we are together again. Dear ones, the song Welcome Table was not originally sung by a bunch of predominantly white people in a Unitarian Universalist church. And so we can say we're going to sit at the welcome table, but also it's our job to lay out a welcome table. Can we do it? Oh, come on, I can hear you back. Can we do it? Are we going to lay out a welcome table for all people? No matter what identities they hold, or who they love, or their pain or their histories? All right, I'm excited to see it. Go in peace, return in love.